here's a step-by-step guide on how you can set up the perfect incline press. Now, I'm going to use dumbbells, but these principles, they can be applied to any incline press. I'm going to start at a 30-ish degree angle. I think many people just first and foremost start with the bench angle way too high, and I think that's a mistake because it usually just ends up turning into an overhead press. If our goals, generally speaking, with an incline press are to train sort of the upper half of the chest and the front delts, I highly recommend starting around a 30-degree angle and then going from there. Now, the first mistake that people are going to make when they do this exercise is they're not going to actually test to see whether or not they're in a good position. So what defines a good position to start? Well, if I lay down here, what you'll notice is that if I rotate my forearms, I can comfortably, or rotate my shoulders to move my forearms, I can comfortably get my forearms into a position that is roughly perpendicular or 90 degrees from the floor, okay? So a lot of people, when they set up, they'll set up with the angle way too high. They'll set up like here or something, and then they'll have a really tough time getting backward this way, and that's why a lot of people you'll see start to just arch the shit out of their back to actually just turn their chest toward the sky, okay? So rather than just simply turning your chest toward the sky, just lower the angle, right? So you can actually be a little bit more stable with that motion and a little bit more supported with that motion, okay? So lean back and be like, okay, here's my bottom position. Can I just comfortably pull myself down into it? Do I have a little bit of wiggle room this way? Okay, yes, I do. Do I have wiggle room this way? Yes, I do. Great. So I have wiggle room this way and this way, which means it's likely going to be a pretty easy for my shoulders stuff, my rotator cuff stuff to basically manage in terms of the stability. And then from there, I'm going to see, okay, how low do I actually pull? Okay. So although there may be some distinctions in terms of range of motion between how much you actively pull and how much you lower, it's a good starting place to actually be to pull down first to see, okay, where do my hands comfortably go? And where do my bones sort of naturally structurally lend my arm path to be? So I'm going to, again, lay down, pull myself down, assess that rotation, and then from there, I'm just thinking, okay, let's actually see how that feels with a slight degree of load. So imagine, hopefully, if you're a male my size and weight, you're not pressing 7.5s, for a hypertrophy stimulus, okay? You pull yourself down into that position, right? And then the whole time, all we're thinking of from there is just simply resisting the weight of the dumbbells to the sky. Now, a couple of cues and tricks that I might advise you all to go with is, number one, play around with how not locking out feels. Okay, why? A lot of people, when they get to this locked position, lose a lot of the tightness and the tension that they have in the pecs, number one. And number two, they end up doing sort of this weird thing, right? So the resistance, yeah, it's going straight up and down, but you want to make sure that you're focused on motion of this bone, right? The segment, the bony segment where your biceps and your triceps are. Notice how in the bottom, it's basically just moving up toward the ceiling. But then at the top, you see how it moves inward, right? So it goes from going like this, and it goes inward, right? So in this top portion of the range, this motion of this bone becomes very inefficient to move the weight. So what picks up a lot of the slack a lot of the times are our shoulder girdle muscles that do this, and then our triceps. So if our goal and our focus is, upper half of the chest and delt, what I recommend is kind of staying within the groove of the motion that's really most loaded, right? So this is usually what I'll use and I won't lock. Now, if you get to this position and you're like, okay, that original thing that I pulled to wasn't great, play around with the angle. See how turning the dumbbells or your palms this way feels. Some people feel better with a little bit more of a supinated or neutral grip, right? And that allows them to bend their elbow a little bit more comfortably to actually press. So no necessary right or wrong here, but what I would advise is instead of starting out here and super flared, see how a little bit more tucked and a little bit more palms facing each other feels, and then go with that same not locking out principle. Other than that, just make sure you're simply controlling tempo, make sure you're simply resisting the weight of the dumbbell and that you're not chewing any sort of squeezing the scaps back and down thing that's just going to antagonize the motion. Once you get set, stay set. Make sure you don't move yourself on the bench. Make sure you follow those first principles of just staying where the weight is, more heavy as opposed to, not related to the actual goal stimulus. And make sure that as you fatigue, you're allowing that range of motion to drop off. So this is kind of the final thing that I'll point to is a lot of times when people start to fatigue, that's when things go wrong. Shoulders come forward, elbows start to do weird things, dumbbells start to turn. Instead of continually trying to get to the highest point, just simply allow the range of motion to drop, right? So you may be able to do 10 reps here, and then maybe the 11th just goes to here, and the 12th just goes to here, and the 13th, and the 14th, and then you just get to a rep, and it's like, boop, okay, I can't lift it anymore. Back to the knees and down, all right? So from setup to execution, that's essentially all the things that I advise in a stepwise fashion for setting up an incline bench. Last thing, I know I already said last thing, but true last thing, don't be tied to one bench angle. right? So if 30 doesn't feel great for you, try a little bit higher, okay? See how that relates. Maybe a little bit more arch at a higher angle for whatever reason feels better as compared to this one. Just as long as you're stable, that's okay. Maybe a little bit lower feels totally fine. And troubleshoot the spine position, right? Alongside the actual adjustment of the bench angle. So if like your natural posture when you get down there doesn't feel too hot, it feels like, my shoulders feel weird. See how a little bit of a prouder posture feels. If a prouder posture doesn't feel awesome, find the sort of in between, right? No necessary correct or incorrect answers, but it also can sort of fall within a window and back to the first principles of like, well, okay, if I'm loading my arm in this particular direction, I know that this stuff has to work. And so as long as you're ending up doing that under control, under high effort, you should be good to go. So if any of you have any questions about the process of the incline setup and how it can relate to different scenarios, drop them in the comments and I'll get to them.
If you like this video and you want to learn more from me, please consider enrolling in my online anatomy and biomechanics course. The course contains over 15 hours specifically dedicated to improving your understanding of anatomy and physics and how it applies to lifting weights. Over 3,000 students have enrolled in this course and have reported back that it's the most easy to digest material that doesn't include any sort of boring textbook lecture that you might normally find in a typical college curriculum. So if you want to improve your ability to lift and as a consequence, grow muscle more easily and reduce your pain in the gym, check out the link in the description.